Welcome to another episode of The Catholic Novel. Today we're going to talk about Piers Paul Read's The Death of a Pope. As I mentioned on another show, I know Piers Paul Read personally. We had lunch together. He's a charming guy, and I think he's a wonderful writer. I think this is a wonderful novel. The most successful novel that Piers Paul Read wrote was Alive, the story of the Andes survivors. Remember the plane crash, and people survived by engaging in a little bit of cannibalism, actually eating the flesh of people who had died. It sold 5 million copies, and it was made into a very successful movie. I read the novel years ago, and I remember seeing the film, but that's the most successful book he's ever written. He wrote the biography of Alec Guinness. He's written history. He's really a man for all seasons. This is, I think, one of his best novels. I really like this novel. If I get a chance to meet with Piers Paul Read again, I'm going to bring up the theology in this novel. It's different from my theology, and I'll get to that in a minute. So, but I want to introduce this by reading one of the early pages. This sets the tone for one level of the novel. Okay, so it's in a courtroom, and an ex-Jesuit priest is on trial. Is he still a faithful Catholic, or is he a terrorist? That's the question that's posed right at the very beginning of this novel. So I just want to read this because it sets the tone. The light is artificial, and the conditioned air is blown in from rectangular vents in the ceiling. There is a faint aroma of paper, plastic, and cloth. Another barrister is on his feet, telling the jury, with apparent conviction, that his client, Juan Uriarte, is not a terrorist. Quite to the contrary, he is a man who has devoted his life to helping others. Latterly, as a senior aid worker for the Catholic Refugee Service, Misericordia International. The director of Misericordia has come from Rome to London to give evidence to this effect. Though born in Spain and retaining Spanish nationality, Uriarte has not lived in that country for 25 years. He is a man with strong convictions. So his lawyer is making a strong case that he is not a terrorist. Mr. Uriarte's only interest has ever been to improve the conditions of the most oppressed, impoverished, and neglected members of mankind. So a considerable part of the novel is that true? Is he really interested in helping mankind? What kind of an ex-Jesuit priest is he? Well, as the novel develops, we find that the church he is promoting doesn't have any sense of the transcendent. It's all this worldly. He seems to be interested in helping the poor, helping the starving, helping those who are on the brink of physical malnourishment, etc. But there's no sense of God at all. Now, after this trial, a young lady meets him who describes herself as a fallen-away Catholic. And apparently, Uriarte has a tremendous personality, really a magnetic guy. And she gets involved with him both in terms of his mission, but also she seems to fall in love with him. So on one level, that's the story. It's a theological mystery thriller, okay? And it takes us a while to settle our view. Is he a terrorist, or is he still a very good Catholic trying to help people? There are other interesting characters in the novel. Now, I read a review of it in which one of the criticisms of the novel is that while these other characters in the novel, they're not developed enough. They do things in the novel that we may not expect them to do. That may be a valid criticism. But even if it is, this is a terrific novel. I strongly recommend it. It's going to bring up all kinds of interesting questions, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. This fallen-away Catholic has an uncle who is a priest. She calls him Lolo, L-O-L-O. I guess that was what she called him when she was a little girl, and it has kind of stuck. I'm going to just read a couple of sentences. This scene is she and her uncle are in a restaurant. They come out of the restaurant into the street. It is warm, and there is the fragrance of blossom and pine needles in the air. The uncle says, "Do you remember St. Augustine?" Luke asks Kate. Luke is his real name, Father Luke. "What do I love when I love my God? the sound that never dies away, the fragrance that is not borne away on the wind, food that is never consumed by eating, and an embrace that is not severed by fulfillment of desire. That is what I love when I love my God. He stops. Kate, his niece, the fallen away Catholic, says, I wish I could believe that, Uncle Lolo, because it would mean, well, it would mean then one wouldn't have to worry, one wouldn't have a worry in the world. Okay, so that's the story on one level, but there's another dimension to the story, to the novel, that really fascinates me. It's the ecclesiology. In an interview, Piers Paul Read said when he was young, he was very much in favor of liberation theology. But as he matured, he felt it was really not a adequate following of Jesus Christ. So in the novel, there is a description of liberation theology, and Read rejects that. So if the words liberal and conservative have any meaning anymore, you would describe Piers Paul Read as a conservative Catholic, although he would say, I'm not conservative, I am Orthodox. Liberation theology is not Orthodox. So right for the epigraph of the novel, he quotes Pope Benedict, and he agrees completely with this quote, and apparently takes this quote as the last word. So Christianity did not bring a message of social revolution, like that of the ill-fated Spartacus, whose struggle led to so much bloodshed. Jesus was not Spartacus. He was not engaged in a fight for political liberation. So why is Piers Paul Read opposed to liberation theology? Because he believes essential to it is a revolution and violence. And he believes it has gone too far toward Marxism, so that atheism almost becomes essential to it, okay? Now, that's not how I view liberation theology. Definitely, the liberation theologians borrow from Karl Marx. But you can't be a Catholic and be an atheist, and you can't be a Catholic and believe that a violent revolution is inevitable. So I think if liberation theology does not embrace those two errors, it seems to me to be a wonderful innovation in Catholic theology. And if I do get a chance to talk to Mr. Read again, I'm going to try to point this out to him. So I look at liberation theology this way. It's rereading the Gospels from the point of view of the poor. So you're not changing the Gospel. You're saying it's there. What we are discovering when we read the Gospels from the point of view of the poor, we're not inserting that. We're discovering that. And of course, what they believe, and I believe this too, all truth we come at from an angle. And to embrace theologies that are only done by middle class or upper middle class white males is to unveil certain meanings of the gospel. But it may also be to miss certain meanings. So as long as, my view would be, as long as we avoid atheism and the necessity for a violent overthrow, I think we're okay. I think we can do this. I know a priest who taught liberation theology, and some seminarians took the course that he was teaching, and they told me that their view was it's not theology, it's sociology. My opinion is they were wrong. It is theology, but it's theology looking at social conditions and what are the implications for Christ's teaching if 1/3 of the human race is starving to death. What are the implications for Christ's teaching when people are living in filthy slums? What are the implications if Christ says, love your neighbor? Then that means, it seems to me, we have to act in some way. So I don't know whether Piers Paul Read would disagree with me or agree with me, but somehow I'm going to get the word to him. As I mentioned on another one of these episodes, if this show turns out okay, I'm going to somehow get a DVD to him or something. Now, the ecclesiology then is not forced down our throats, and that's why this is a great writer. Just a couple of minutes ago, I tried to explain the two ecclesiologies to you. That's not the way they appear in the novel. They appear in the novel in the story, in the characters. It's not, at no point in reading this book that I think I was reading some kind of homily in favor of traditional ecclesiology, or somehow some message was being imposed. No, the novel, in my opinion, is never tilted He makes his points as an artist always does in the work of art. And that's why I think it's a great novel, that he's able to do this. You know, when we did a novel by Walker Percy, I made the point that we have to ask, Percy said he started writing novels because he wanted to affect a larger group of people. So we've got to ask the question, you know, does that mean you're going to proselytize? Does that mean you're going to kind of preach to people? Well, Walker Percy was a good enough novelist that he never did that, and so is Piers Paul Read. So while I disagree with the ecclesiology that Piers Paul Read has embraced, I admire his talent as a writer. You know, I've read 4 or 5 of his books, and maybe eventually, you know, I'll be talking about all of them. But it seems to me his Catholic faith is deep, and when he writes a novel, this is the way he sees reality. This is what he thinks is the truth, right? So when I may be presenting his view incorrectly. You know, maybe I'm making it too black and white. I'm not sure, but I'm going by interviews he's given, and also by the novels he's written. I don't think anybody will be disappointed in terms of style. I don't think so. It's a theological thriller. You know, for a long time you don't know about not the main character, but the ex-priest. Is he authentic? Is he really helping the poor? Eventually, it turns out it's a totally this worldly religion that he's going to promote. And for Piers Paul Read, and I think for most of us, that will not satisfy the human heart. You know, ultimately, my view, secular humanism just does not work. You know, our hearts are restless until they rest in God, okay? St. Augustine got it right, okay? And I think that little quote from St. Augustine is terrific. So the minor characters all begin, as the novel progresses, they all have key roles. And another sign of the talent of this writer is he does all this without forcing it. It all comes together at the end. So anyway, every novel I've chosen, almost all of them I recommend to you, and I think you will, if you take The Death of the Pope, Death of a Pope by Piers Paul Read, I think you're really going to like it, and it probably will move you to read other novels by him.